everybody. Welcome to CAMERA's Partnership of Christians and Jews, the partnership program. I'm Amy Zewe. CAMERA stands for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis. Today we have joining us from the UK, Stephen Jaffe with the Magan David Adam UK, and he's going to explain a little bit more about that. And Stephen is a Jewish gentleman living in the UK. I'm going to let him explain a little bit about his background, but I believe it's important for us, for our network, to really hear and understand the firsthand experiences that Jews are having in the UK and what the community is like and what the interaction is with the Jewish population, the Israeli population, and the Christian community, especially in an unprecedented atmosphere of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which we feel on both sides of the pond just now. So, Stephen, thank you for joining us. We would love to learn more about your background and your experiences and your organization. So thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Amy. I'm really delighted, and I'm very conscious of the work that CAMERA does here in the UK, in North America, and elsewhere in terms of the media work that you're doing, that vitally important work at the on campus level. And I'm familiar with the partnership that you're building up, a partnership between Jews and Christians, which is so vital at this time. So I grew up in a part of the UK, Belfast in Northern Ireland. You might pick up a slightly different British accent than some of your other British guests that you may have had. And that is still a very church-going society. Perhaps Christianity there is stronger than in other parts of the UK, which has become very secular. And I went to a school which had a strong Christian Bible society. So from a very early age, I have valued friendships with evangelical Christians, and that's probably not the case with the majority of Jews in the UK who may have grown up in much larger Jewish communities, gone to Jewish schools, and maybe not met that many Christian people in their lives. And over about the last 10 years or so, I've been engaged in outreach from the Jewish community to the wider Christian world. And that's quite unusual. Certainly in the UK, there's various Christian organizations that outreach to the Jewish community in different ways. But I was supported in that work by the main Jewish organizations or main representative bodies, which shows how serious they took the need for this engagement. I was supported for many years by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is our main representative body in the UK. And today I'm working with Magen David Adom, which I'll explain a bit later. So I'm kind of traveling up and down the country. I speak at a lot of smaller regional Jewish communities, but also in a lot of churches. My wife tells me I'm in more churches than I am in synagogues, and there is an element of truth in that. I'm very fortunate that we are blessed with Christian support in the UK, and that I'm invited to come and speak to a variety of churches. They can be Pentecostal, inner city, in rural areas, majority Black congregations. And this is quite a unique perspective, really, to have in terms of outreach from the Jewish community. I think the work is becoming more and more important because you're asking about, the perceptions within the British Jewish community at this time. Well, there is a sense of isolation. We've all been through the trauma of October the 7th, as Jews and Christians who stand with Israel, the huge trauma of that day. It was followed by an explosion of hatred against Israel on our streets. The marches against Israel, they didn't wait. They were already planning on the 7th of October itself. We know that they put in an application to march that on that day. So even while the killing was continuing. So the Jewish community went through the deep trauma of the Hamas atrocities themselves to experiencing hatred on their own streets and in huge numbers, by the way, bigger numbers than perhaps we'd seen before.
Right.
So that brings fear, of course. Yeah, I speak to Jewish people who tell me they don't go to the city centre. They're too scared to go in their own cities. But alongside that explosion of hate, which includes also anti-Semitic incidents of, assaults, attacks on Jewish people and Jewish property, a lot of hate in social media, of course.
Mm.
Alongside all of that, there was a deep sense of silence that many of our traditional partners and friends in the UK, and that's, I'm talking widely here,
Mhm.
uh, preferred to remain silent in the aftermath of October the 7th. And that includes sporting organizations. And I have to say, it also included our traditional interfaith partners. So the Jewish community had invested hugely in interfaith work, and a lot of that had been with mainstream denominations. We have an established church in the UK, the Church of England, which is a Protestant church. We've got, a large Roman Catholic denomination, and that is where the Jewish community had invested a lot of its efforts to engage. And I think there was huge disappointment and
Right.
sadness that the atrocities of October the 7th, which was, the biggest loss of Jewish life since the operation of Auschwitz and Treblinka, that so many of our friends, even on a personal level, our work colleagues or whatever, were just holding back and not expressing even the most basic of sympathy. So this is, of course, ongoing. The war continues, and the war is traumatic. War is horrible.
Yeah.
The way it's presented in the UK in our media is it's presented as being a war with, on the one side, the Israeli army, and on the other side, the civilians in Gaza. Those are the only two parties in this conflict, so far as the BBC is concerned. Hamas hide underground in their tunnels, and they're out of the picture. So we're seeing, the genuine brutality of war, which none of us want to see, but it's being presented in a very warped way, and that's impacting on the Jewish community as well. So when there are Christians who are standing with us, Amy, and they are, I'm not going to pretend that it's the majority of the Christian church in the UK.
Right.
It's coming from a relatively small element, but those friends are true friends, and they're not impacted by the mainstream media. They're not impacted by a very negative discourse from many of our political leaders, or indeed by our academic elites, which are very
Mhm.
hostile to Israel. And the Jewish community in the UK, it's, we're long standing, where many of us are third, fourth, fifth generation British Jews. We feel very much part of the society here. Uh, our kids, will tend to go to universities and face real hostility. So on all different levels, it's a challenging time. I want to make it clear that Jewish life is continuing. You
Mhm.
know, I hear from a lot of my members of my community saying I've never felt more proud to be Jewish. I've never felt it more important to go to synagogue, for example.
Mhm.
So we're not hiding under the stairs. Some people are scared and frightened, but there also is I think a bit of a counter as well, desire to stand up for ourselves too. And in that, we have the support of good Christian people, of which we are very grateful.
Well, we're happy to be that support, and our my compatriots in the faith on that side of the pond, we work hard to encourage them to understand the biblical, historical, and moral reasons why this is our mandate to stand with the Jewish people. So can you explain here in America and elsewhere, the idea of Christians supporting Jews or Israel, or Christian Zionism is or Zionist is sometimes the phrasing used, and that can be defined differently by different people. Some people here actually use it as a derogatory term, but I don't. Um, but it took some years for the Jewish community in America, at least in my experience, and this is of course changing especially since October 7th, that idea of the receptiveness that a Christian community would say, I want to reach out to the Jewish community and offer solidarity or support or advocacy, or just say, you're not alone, we're here for you, what can I do? Um, and that's met sometimes with a little bit of distrust, or what's your motives, and that has historical foundations of why that distrust is there. But you're coming from this from the other side. You're a Jewish person who had been raised in a community where your faith and your heritage was valued, because it's the roots of our faith. So in your perspective as a Jewish person, even 10 years ago, and you were explaining to other Jewish people who you reach out to and why, tell us a little bit about that and what, if anything, changed after October 7th as you continued that effort.
So I think you're absolutely right, Amy. The idea that a Christian just has to knock on a synagogue door and they'll be met with open arms and it's not the case. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of historical baggage. A lot of Jewish people regard the church as being anti-Semitic to its core. Always has been, always will be, and that is a product of perhaps their own family's experiences.
Mhm.
Uh, so that's a big issue. We're not united in every aspect of our theology, but we share a love for Hebrew scripture. So we have many things that we share, but there are differences as well. And the question that I'm asked most commonly by my Jewish colleagues and friends when I explain to them what I'm doing is, well, what's their agenda? What is this Christian support all about? What are they? The idea is that you can't take it on face value. You've got to look for some motive, and that is a ongoing education, and it takes time to build up trust. And I can point to you to small examples across the UK where Christians have reached out, and it's taken time, and they've perhaps faced rebuffs at various points, but they've had the persistence and the just the unqualified love which can, break down these barriers. So, uh, the issues, we could talk all day about the tensions and the issues, but there is a lot of positive stuff that's going on, and I think the Jewish community is receptive. I'll give you an example of it. There's a young Christian uh, pastor. I say young, she's probably touching 40, but younger than me. And her name is Haley Ace. And since October the 7th, she has spoken at a number of uh, events in London for the hostages, for the Jewish community, for Israel generally. And she's won a huge amount of acceptance. And this is remarkable. I mean, I really think this is something that's very, very encouraging. And
It,
what she brings is not huge political sophistication or whatever. It's a sincerity and an honesty and a passion. She stood up at Trafalgar Square in the center of London, a very iconic venue. There was about 25,000 people at it, both Jews and Christians, but a predominantly Jewish crowd. And she said, I don't want to stand beside you as a Jewish community. I want to stand in front of you. When they come for you, they've got to come to me first. And I think Jewish people were repeating that to me, that they remembered that she'd said that, weeks afterwards. So it touched hearts. So I'm encouraged that there are, good friendship in the UK, which is only going to grow further.
Yeah, and we have to, as Christians, acknowledge the anti-Semitism that had been in the church historically and how that seeped into society and allowed injustices and persecutions to happen. And there are sentiments that are still in the established church today that remain. So it's understandable that the Jewish community might be a little distrustful, or the history of forced conversions and all sorts of unchristlike conduct that went.
One thing I would say, I mean, is that a lot of Jewish people are not aware of different kinds of Christians.
Right.
So in the UK, we have an established church, the Church of England, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is the head of that. So that Jewish people will be aware of the Church of England, they'll be aware of the Catholic Church. A huge section of the growing church in the UK, the Jewish community has very little knowledge or experience of, and this is an educational process, I think, to understand that there are different perspectives, different outlooks. Most Jewish people have not heard of replacement theology. They might have an inkling as to what it is and what it leads to, but their understanding is fairly basic. So there is a lot of education that needs to be done on the Jewish side, and I know on the Christian side as well, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely. I had a friend of mine from New York was down here 2 weeks ago for some events that Christians and Jews were together in solidarity doing some meetings and projects on Capitol Hill. And she's Jewish, and she said, I just need to take the message back to my community that doesn't even know that these Christians exist that are for them, because the sentiment that you started with, and so many so many of my Jewish friends and acquaintances have said is that there's this feeling of aloneness, right? That you're alone in this. And that's really one of my chief missions is to figure out a way to amplify the mission that you're not alone. And it's not, what I can do for you. It's more of a question, how can I help? How can I help? What can I do?
Indeed, and I think it's important to say that this is something global. In the UK, perhaps you've used the term Christian Zionists, and I think the various Christian Zionist ministries in the UK would say, well, they're a bit of a remnant in the church, that they're not the dominant force. Perhaps that will change, but at the moment, okay. But when you look globally, when you look at Africa, there's a video from South Africa of the chief rabbi of that country speaking to a prayer gathering in the largest soccer stadium in Johannesburg. There's about 80 to 100,000 people there. And he's invited to address Christians as the chief rabbi of South Africa. And both what he said, which I thought was great, and more importantly, I think the response that he got from those Christians was just so enormously encouraging. And South Africa is a country that we are kind of equating with hostility towards Israel, certainly at a government level,
Mhm.
but at a grassroots Christian level, there are huge things happening. And the impact that that had on the chief rabbi of South Africa to sense the force and the power of Christian prayer of that huge gathering, it made a huge impact on him. So there are things happening, across the world, which are very, very significant for our day.
I know it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see what goes on around the world globally and not just isolate it down to certain nations. So, can you give us any insights? I know you being part of an established Jewish heritage as a UK citizen, you and your family. Can you give us any insights to any Israeli population that's in the UK, that are there for work or projects or attempting immigration, like the first generation Israelis? Is there
Yeah.
some
So it's a
feedback?
very interesting question. I said the Jewish community in the UK is very established, and many of us can trace back generations ago, or great great grandparents coming here. But there is a much more recent influx, and including the Israelis, and uh, they are. I think many Jewish communities find it quite challenging because uh, our ways of expressing our Jewishness might be different. Particularly, a large section of the Israeli population is secular.
Mhm.
For us, for the community that I belong to, in any case, the synagogue is very central, and the Jewish faith is very central. It may not be the same for Israelis. If they're secular, tend to be very secular. So there are cultural clashes, generational clashes. Perhaps not every British Jew is fluent in Hebrew, so there might be linguistic issues or whatever. And also, many Israelis who are living abroad are doing so because they want to get away from the pressures of living in Israel. Many are going because of work, or for all sorts of reasons. But for many of them, they're coming out of a war situation, and they just want to keep their heads down.
Because yeah,
So
I
we
mean,
find, yeah.
especially in the time of this war, where an Israeli or a Jew can be blamed for anything that it is perceived that the Israeli government's doing it must be very difficult. I mean, do you find that people, I know you said that there's a lot of people in your community that are saying it's more important than ever to feel pride in our heritage, in our faith, and in our expression. But I mean, in America, there are all sorts of surveys out that Jewish students on college campuses, for example, are hiding their identity in some way, shape, or form. Is that
Oh,
happening?
absolutely. I mean, these are both valid in terms of the experience of the Jewish community, and then they can exist in the same person. In other words, in the outside world, they're being very careful about not being openly Jewish, but in their own safe space of the synagogue, of the Jewish community center, of the youth group, whatever it is, that's where they're expressing their pride. So it can be even in the one individual, both of those reactions. Going back to the Israelis and the issues we have there, I think being an immigrant in a new country. I have a sense when I go into London. where's a problem area, I have that knowledge, experience. As a new immigrant, you don't really have that, and so it's a more scary environment to be in. So I think, there's all sorts of bridge building and reaching out, even from the Jewish community to the Israelis.
Sure.
And that is, yeah, that is, another whole area. So I think it is a time of coming together, of encouraging each other, of standing together. Christians and Jews have a long, long history. It's not necessarily a happy history, but what we share is fundamentally important to both of us. A love of the Hebrew scripture, a love of the land of Israel. What's important to God is important to us. And when we're commanded to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, that's
That's
something that we share. And it's quite unique for two faith communities to share that much in common. We also, and I think this is important to say, share common challenges. It's important for me
right.
as a Jew to acknowledge that more Christians are being martyred in our world today than at any time in history. And that martyrdom is something that we as Jews should stand with you and encourage you to speak out on, because we have been there as a people and faced our own martyrdom to the indifference of the wider world. So we need to stand with you on that. And issues regarding anti-Semitism and anti-Israel extremism, well, you will know as much as I do. First, they come for the Jews, but it never ends by being against the Jews. First the Saturday people, then the
And
Sunday
the
people.
Sunday people.
So, Amy, this battle isn't just Christians having to respond to attacks on the Jewish community, because this will be an attack on how you worship, an attack on what you believe in. We're seeing, I talked about the big crowds on the streets of our cities. It's bringing together Islamists, it's bringing together the hard left.
Hmm.
These people share a common agenda of hatred towards Israel, yes, towards the West, yes, towards you and what you believe in, absolutely. So we face this together, and I think these are very powerful. Both what we share positively and the challenges that we face are positive, are very strong driving forces in our day. And I believe there will be big, big changes. We've talked about what we're seeing in South Africa.
Yeah.
I can talk also about South America, large gatherings in countries there, Christian worship, and again, inviting Jewish leaders to come and visit. So I think this is a very, very significant feature of our world today, for a time such as this, which is
Exactly.
indeed, I know, something that many Christians hold very, very dear to them, that this is the calling of our current world.
I mean, I really appreciate, Stephen, that you can take this topic, this unfortunate topic of hostility and persecution and anti-Semitism and everyday life being difficult, and it at the end of it, there's a hope. It actually will bring about something. It can bring about something good, and that is the two communities that share the Christian community, as they say, is grafted in terms of we get our values, our morals, and ethics, as does the whole Western civilization, from the Jewish people, from their texts, from the Torah, and it is not only our obligation to stand in solidarity. Indeed, the attack on the Jewish people, which is sort of manifested in Israel, because now it's a state. It really is an attack on all of us. It's attack on God's people. It's attack on God's values and message. And that's why we need to stand together. And I hate to frame it that there's a selfish reason why Christians need to stand in solidarity and combat the Jew hatred and the anti-Semitism. I don't want it to be a selfish reason, but it really is also a form of self-preservation for our own freedoms and activities. So Stephen, what else can we learn from you? What else can you share with our audience that we can be aware of? For example, any particular movements or groups? I mean, Camera UK does a great job, and we repost and retweet their stuff as far as the work on monitoring the media, the work on campuses. But is there anything in particular that you're working on that we need to know about?
So I think when the Jewish community looks for support, they are very, what touches them, I think, is a practical show of support. In other words, I know it's and there's cultural differences here, but if a Christian comes up to me and says, "I love you and I pray for you," I think wonderful. But what are you actually doing?
Right.
What's your where are you showing practical support? And I know that's that's perhaps not a gracious response, but I think for many Jewish people that is true. So I would encourage Christians when they reach out to Jewish communities to show something practical in their support alongside, and I value the importance of prayer, alongside of it, something practical. And you mentioned that I'm working for an organization called Magen David Adom. It's Israel's national medical emergency service.
Wow.
And we have a thriving Christian Friends group in the UK. And in the aftermath of October the 7th, there was a huge outpouring of practical support for Magen David Adom. It was the ambulance service, it was the first responders. Magen David Adom is responsible for 90% of the collection and processing of blood in Israel. You can
Wow.
imagine the strategic importance. And October the 7th, 1,200 people murdered in a day, over 5,000 injured. You can imagine the enormous strain on Magen David Adom at that point. And we had a huge outpouring of support from the Christian community. And I was able to point out to Jewish people that there was a Bible group in the Shetland Islands. Now, that is a group of islands far to the north of the north coast of Scotland. And they, as a Bible group, had raised a sum for Magen David Adom. And in another island called Jersey, which is just off the French coast, it's also part of the wider British Isles, if you like. There was a group of churches who were meeting on the October the 7th for tabernacles. It was an event, and whatever they raised that day, they wanted it to go to practical support for Israel, having seen the
Amazing.
atrocities. And I'm able to get that message across to the Jewish community that there are Christians who are standing with us, not just in an abstract and theoretical and theological way, but that they want to show practical support. And I mean, that is, I think, an important and significant part of building the friendship is to show something practical. So that would be my message. There are many great causes out there. Magen David Adom is one, but that is a way of showing a kind of practical support, which I think really resonates with Jewish people.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And we're happy to share that website so people can look at it some more and support it. Stephen, your experience and your work is just so important. We're so happy that you were able to come on and share it with us. And we'd love to have you on again as things unfold and alliances are strengthened and collaboration is created. And I'd like to just reiterate that message of being practical. I mean, prayers and good thoughts and well wishes are definitely the foundation of what will motivate us to go out and do. And that includes supporting with resources, but it could also include just participation. I mean, when there's something happening on a college campus, if you're in the area, it's okay to go out there and stand. As that pastor you mentioned, she did not just stand beside you. She said, "I will stand in front of you." And that's a very important message. We need to be able to get outside of our comfort zone and say, "No, we'll stand in front of you if we need to." And I believe that's a beautiful message, and that solidarity can continue to grow. Stephen, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and we thank you for your time. And please have a very productive and wonderful week moving forward.
Thank you so much, Amy. Just to say thank you to you for what you're doing, and to Camera, and to all the Christians who are standing with Israel. It takes guts at this moment in time. It is challenging, and it's deeply, deeply appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best.